Hello everybody, this is Dr. Novak again, and today I wanted to talk about a lot of times I get hobbyists that bring up the thing about water quality, and I think it's the parameters of which they measure water quality are really not very good parameters to really measure water quality. They seem to boast a lot about, well, I have an aquarium, haven't done a water change in 5 months, 8 months, 9 months, and I have lots of plants and they're growing good, and my water is crystal clear, and therefore I have great water quality. Now, this can't be further from the truth. There's lots of parameters in an aquarium that tell you if you have good water quality. Just because the turbidity of the water is crystal clear, so is gin crystal clear, right? But no fish or plants can live in it, but it's crystal clear. The point I'm making here is turbidity is not really much of a goalpost to set water quality on. It only means to the eye, visually, how clear the tank looks, how much particulate matter is in the aquarium, or how much free-floating algae, tongue-tied there, algae is in the aquarium or pond. So when you look at a pond, just because it could be green or murky, doesn't mean the water quality is bad. If that would be the case, then most of the rivers in South America would be classified as very poor water quality, but we know that not to be true. So crystal clear water has nothing to do with water quality. Not changing your water for months, that's also not an indication of water quality. A lot of fish and a lot of plants and stuff can get accustomed to the water as it deteriorates very slowly in the aquarium. I've seen this. I'm sure a lot of you have seen it. I'm sure I'll get comments of people saying that a tank looked perfectly fine. The water quality looked perfectly fine, but yet they could tell things were out of kilter. You know, there was just something that was not right, even though everything looked perfect and water changes were not done. So, and I've seen this, and people then move their fish or whatever to another tank, and boom, they come up sick or they die. And they scratch their heads saying, well, what happened here? Why did they die? They did so good in my other tank. Well, they became accustomed to the pollution that was in the tank. Now, that doesn't, when you're looking at water quality, anyone will tell you water quality is something that, especially with saltwater aquariums, that has to be measured not by the eye and not just by smelling the tank. Smelling the tank, yes, you can get some idea, but there could be foods that you have put in there that smell pretty bad, and carbon could be used to take that smell out. But the point I'm trying to make here is the water quality could be very good or perfect or good for your animal life. Little things like, what is the redox of your aquarium? Where is it at? Just looking at parameters of, well, I have no ammonia, no nitrites, no nitrates, phosphates are low or non-existent. There's other parameters that we look at for water quality when we test out water. A lot more things like that. One is free-floating bacteria count. There are tests for that, where you can have an abundance of bacteria. But what kind of bacteria? Is it good bacteria or is it bad bacteria? In our aquariums, a lot of times the bacteria is fish-related bacteria and not plant-related bacteria. But in let's see, systems like a pond or lake or something, the bacteria will be more plant related than fish related, because the fish population will be the lowest in those ecosystems. So you got to know what your bacteria. Do you have good bacteria or bad bacteria? Is the bacteria to the point where your fish are carriers of diseases and yet they're not showing it, and a newcomer put into the tank will get sick immediately or show signs of stress? Then there is the redox, oxidation potential of the aquarium water. How well does it act as oxidizers, oxidizing the insalts that come into your aquarium? Most people don't know this. They have no idea even what redox is, or they have no idea about the amount of oxidizers they could have in their aquariums. So when we think about those parameters, which are very simple for a hobbyist to test for, it's about as far as we're going to go without sending stuff to a lab to find out if you have, insalts such as mercury or anything else inside your aquarium. We're not going to go to that extreme. We don't have to. That's only for, ponds and lakes and stuff like that, where you're going to have your water, more deeply tested to find out what's going on with it. Oxygen levels are usually not a problem in our aquarium either, compared to natural systems that can have a oxygen depletion, CO2 levels that are hiding. And you may have CO2 at the bottom of a pond, and at the top it does not, or a lake. So these are problems you have to deal with in the wild that we don't deal with in our aquarium. But most hobbyists will turn around and say, well, I haven't done a water change and my water's crystal clear, my plants are growing good. That doesn't necessarily mean, you have great water quality for fish or your invertebrates. Because if it did mean that, then why are there so many people who are not successful with those same parameters, is what I'm saying. It's funny how if you look at those parameters, for an example, and you look at goldfish, for example, you have those parameters and you find out your goldfish still aren't doing well. Now, this is something that you can see on YouTube, where people are doing everything right. They're doing everything they were told to do, and their goldfish are still getting sick and dying, and they finally throw the towel in and say, hey, what's going on? I don't know. All my parameters are good. My water quality looks good from what I can test. It looks nice, clean, and clear. I got plenty of oxygen. Everything that I just stated to you, but the fish are still dying. They're not growing, they're dying. What's happening? Why? Everything looks good. Because there's some hidden details in there that are not being explained of what happens in our aquariums that could be lacking, and we just don't know it until it's too late. Now, that doesn't mean that what I just talked about, you can't have complete success. We know people can have complete success. We know that. That's a fact. Okay, just from what I described, people can have very good success for the rest of their lives in the aquarium trade without knowing all the science behind, let's say, a plenum, that positively, negatively charge ions in the water. Some people don't even understand that even exists. You mean water is electrically charged? Yeah, they don't even know. And I guess out of sight, out of mind. They don't know because other YouTube channels really never talk about it. And there's more to it of why something happens than maybe you know why it does happen. different than what I'm trying to show you on my channel. But the point I'm trying to make is, which is a very good point, when goldfish wind up dying on people constantly, or constantly getting sick, there could be more to it than what they're realizing. And therefore, they add drugs, and drugs could bring down the redox, the oxidation potential. Drugs can also are gram-negative, gram-positive, which will kill bacteria along with whatever is ailing the fish. And you can see where the cycle just keeps going, where the fish recover from one problem but wind up getting a different problem. And that's exactly what winds up happening, especially with fish that are very touchy and very hard to keep. At one time, discus used to fall in that category. Very hard to keep. If you didn't do water changes constantly and kept up with the water quality, discus would wind up not making it. They would die. They would get disease. They would stop eating. There was all kinds of things people were trying to keep their discus alive and healthy, even as much as to feed them garlic foods to try to help their immune system. And this was something that, 40, 50 years ago was very, very common, until we start learning more and more about, well, what really can happen with water quality, and how can we change it, and how can we understand ions that are in the aquarium that may bother some fish and not bother other fish. Because ions aren't basically going to bother plants. They're not going to make your aquarium look dingy looking, okay? But an overabundance of ions can wind up, advocating the abundance of algae in your aquarium, and you won't understand why. And why do some aquariums, for example, the aquarium behind me, why does an aquarium like that run for 3+ years and the gravel's never been clean, the substrate's never been clean, and yet you don't have a big algae problem? You're not, you're not looking at the tank and oh man, I can't believe it's disgusting looking. All I have is why? Because there's a balance that happens between the ions, how they're attracted out of the water, how bacteria can utilize those ions as a food source, how they get their carbons. It all becomes a science that a lot of people don't even care about. All they want it to do is work. And that's basically all they care about. But there is more to aquarium keeping than that. And that would explain to you why do people stay in this hobby so long? Why are some people so successful and other people's are not? Why is it that after 3 years so many people drop out of the hobby? It just becomes too hard for them, or they become unsuccessful, or they give it up, or too many water changes. Oh, I'm tired of all the water changes. I'm tired of doing them. It's too much of a hassle, because this is a different environment than owning a parrot or a canary or a dog or a cat. Aquatic environment is a whole different science than having terrestrial animals, a turtle, hamster, gerbils, lizards, snakes. When you have an aquatic environment, that environment is completely different than any of those pets we have. So this could explain why people drop out. And this also explains why there are so many ways, as they say, of skinning a cat in this particular hobby, where so many people will say, well, you got to do this, or you got to leave the substrate out, or you should put the substrate in, or you should put the substrate in a plenum, or you should take the plenum away and put the substrate directly on the bottom. Or there is so many different ways that people are telling you how to set something up. And we're all trying to achieve the same goal. That's why I've often told people, if you find something that works, stick with it. Don't change for the namesake of changing. If you find it, if it does work, I don't care if you don't want to use an oxyfiltration system or a plenum. It's strictly up to you. They're your animals. But find something that fits your niche. If somebody tells you something and it's not working, at least you have other avenues to go down. It would be terrible if we only had one way of thinking of something. You know, always look at hang on the back filters and canister filters as mechanical filters, box filters, sponge filters. Sponge filters now are a tricky subject because they're mechanical and they're biological. And those are a little tricky when we try to clean them because you can kill a lot of the biological activity on them. And that's one reason we have them, is because of biological. Where if you have a box filter inside the aquarium, it's not dependent to be a biological if you're using a substrate that would have all your biological. And if your substrate isn't able to handle your biological, then you have a problem. Then what are you doing wrong? Is the substrate not performing correctly? Because it should do all your biological, so you don't have to depend on any outside sources to add biological activity to an aquarium, especially an aquarium. You know, these aren't ponds where we're trying to have fish that are, 24, 28 inches long, big, huge, 10 inches of girth on them. We're not dealing with that. We're just dealing with fish. Messy, yes, as I've shown you, like if you have geophagus or if you have goldfish or Oscars or something like that, where their tanks are super, super dirty, you have to deal with that with mechanical filter, getting that out of the aquarium. But otherwise, if you're not dealing with that, just smaller fish, that's if you're failing because your biological activity isn't enough. But we've been convinced, we've been programmed to constantly think of everything should be biological, and it doesn't have to be. So you shouldn't be scared to clean out your hang on the back filter. You shouldn't be scared to clean your canister filter, or you're going to have problems. If you are, then your tank's not set up correctly biologically, because you're depending on an outside source that's supposed to be mechanical for biological, and that shouldn't be. It should be mechanical, and biological should be separate. So that's one thing I wanted to talk about, is that why do people fall out of the hobby? Why do people finally get disgusted, throw the towel in? Because understanding what I have just said is sometimes they beyond their comprehension, or they're just being told the same rhetoric over and over again, and it winds up being a failure for them. And I've seen that. I've heard people say, I followed everything to a T, everything to a T. I followed all the directions to a T, and I still was not successful. And in ending this, I will just say, if you are a newcomer watching this, just remember, it's not only challenging for you, but it's even challenging for the most experienced hobbyists out there. Believe me, you're not all alone. You're not thinking, oh my gosh, I'm new to this hobby and I'm a failure. Even the most experienced hobbyist winds up with troubles. Believe me, we all wind up with trouble. This is a tricky environment to keep absolute. And there are no absolutes when it comes to aquarium keeping. So until next time, happy fish keeping.